Happy Independence Day, everybody. I wanted to let you know, give you a caveat before you see the video. I recorded that about 10 o'clock this morning with Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. Um, Bob is an expert at what he does and what he knows. He spent 25 years in the military, another 25 years with the Pentagon as a contractor. He's been in Iraq, he's been in Ukraine, he's been in Russia, he's been in meetings with secretaries of defense. He's taught in the War College. Bob knows what he's talking about, and that's why he's been a regular on my show. Matter of fact, this was our sixth show, and I actually told him, I said, hey, Bob, happy anniversary, because our very first show was on July the 4th, 2023. And so I feel really privileged to get to talk to him and get some expert advice, wisdom, knowledge about geopolitics. Now, Bob is great. Me, on the other hand, I was having a Joe Biden this morning, a Joe Biden moment. I could not get words out of my mouth. I stuttered and stammered. I couldn't say the word anti-Semitic. I don't know what I said, but that wasn't it. And part of the problem was I left my notes sitting over on the other side of the room, and I couldn't get up from my chair in the middle of a show. So I kind of had to play it by ear. But hey, laugh at me, have a good joke on me. It ain't about me. I wanted you to hear from Bob, because Bob, like I said, is an expert, and we are in a serious time of our nation. And I think it's important that everybody see this. And so God bless, enjoy it, laugh at me, but really listen to what Bob has to say.
Divine justice coming down, coming down. It's divine justice coming down. Divine justice coming down, coming down. Divine justice coming down.
I've got Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Bob, with us this morning. Bob, I want to thank you for taking time out on this holiday. Happy Independence Day. I don't know if you recall this, but this is our 1 year anniversary. It was exactly a year ago today we did our very first interview.
Wow.
And,
no, I didn't know that, Chris.
Yeah, this is
Thanks
number
for having
6.
me.
This is number 6, and I appreciate you willing to work on a holiday. Not many people are. But we're going to be talking pretty much about the same thing. A year ago, we talked about the cognitive abilities of Mr. Biden, how they were, digressing and what's going to become of our nation. Well, after the debate last Thursday night, and I know you watched it, I watched it, it became apparent to everybody. And now what we were saying out in public, both the left and the right are saying in public. And here's my main concern is our national security. My wife, who is non-political, she's kind of engaged, she's on the city council, but she doesn't keep up much. And she was gone on a religious retreat on Thursday night, so she didn't see the debate. Last night, I showed her clips from the debate, and she said, that is so hard to watch. And she goes, what's to stop anybody from attacking us now? And that was kind of my question I posed to you a year ago, because I had heard you say it on Skywatch. I had heard Seb Gorka say it on a show that he was on, that more than the left and the liberals don't want Trump in office. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. And I became aware of it's called the Shanghai SOCCOS. I think you know what I'm talking about. They're kind of gathered together against the West, but now Turkey's wanting to get in with that. You see that Russia's now got friends with Iran, became just recently friends again with North Korea. So all these guys are kind of getting their little gang together, and we've got a president that is showing no cognitive abilities, who is making the decisions, who's been making the decisions. And God forbid we have a terrorist attack because of all the immigrants coming across the border, and we've got Paris coming up. You know, I remember Munich. I wasn't, you know, I think I was 11, 12 years old. And I remember that whole debacle when they came in, the Palestinian group, and kidnapped the Israelis. Well, what's to say they wouldn't maybe go after the Israelis and the Americans based on everything we're seeing in the universities, the anti-Israel, anti-sentiment uh, talk. Just it puts us in a precarious position, don't you think?
Yeah, no doubt, Chris. The unsecured southern border, with untold millions of people that have crossed, no doubt a certain percentage are of the persuasion that they would like to destroy America, and some are sleeper cells with that intent. We've heard that from the FBI director. We've heard it from others. So the warning's out there. And I remind people all the time, Chris, that it only took 19 Saudi terrorists to bring us to our knees back in 2001. And I fear that with many, many more of the like-minded radicals in this country, that they could go after infrastructure, they could go after masses in stadiums and malls and the like, and really create chaos. And so that's important. You went through a sort of a geopolitical litany of countries and threats, and I too watched the debate between Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden on Thursday of last week, and was struck that Mr. Biden was actually coming across worse than I thought that he perhaps would. He didn't seem to have all his cognitive faculties in place, in spite of the fact that for 10 days he'd been up at Camp David, rehearsing and resting and the like. And of course, the excuses after the fact, really don't mean much. It's what you always do to spin a story if you get unpopular results. If I were in China or Russia or North Korea, Iran, or just about anywhere in the world, these international leaders watch one another. I will tell you, our own intelligence community keeps close tabs on every international leader. We look at their profiles and we look at what the analysts, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, and all tell us is what their likely next moves are. Well, they're doing the same thing on Mr. Biden.
Yes.
And if we were to read the dossier, in one of those major capitals, I think it would probably scare us to death, because they as much of us have seen with our own eyes that this man is just not present. He is not only physically stumbling, but his mental skills are not what they need to do. And at the same time, we recognize that he is the head of our government. He is the person that is followed by that lieutenant colonel that has the football, that has all the nuclear codes. And if he's indisposed, as apparently he is, after 4 o'clock every afternoon and before 10 o'clock in the next morning, I'm certainly hopeful that he has access and the advisors have access to him in those dark hours, because that's when precisely an enemy might strike. So I would be taking advantage of that, as I know for a fact that many of our adversaries are indeed doing that. And so it is not at all reassuring that not only do we have a very weak vessel in the White House, but he's put in place 4,000 plus appointees that are of like mind in many cases. Now, I don't know if how many are demented or cognitively challenged. I hope not many, but they are certainly ideologically aligned with Mr. Biden, who promotes, women or men, competing against women. They promote all sorts of things that are just morally corrupt as far as I'm concerned. And then, of course, their decision making with regard to promoting wars, the Ukraine war, which I have issues with, certainly not helping our good ally in Israel as much as they ought to, and castigating Mr. Netanyahu and the like. But that's only a very little part of a global effort by this administration to send messages that I think are incredibly anti-American and certainly don't bolster our own defense. And so we, to our chagrin, must, see that we get stable, smart, morally straight people in positions of great authority, to represent our best interests and to bring security and promise back to this country. Now, of course, ultimately that relies upon, the coming of Christ to this earth and, the new heaven and so forth. But in the interim, we should want solid, preferably Christians, that understand the direction of this world and are standing tall in positions of authority to make the tough decisions as we go forward as a nation. Because today, unlike only a few years ago, I see that we are truly in a very desperate situation, a dire situation, I'd argue, because of the weakness and the corruption of the Biden administration, starting with Biden himself.
Right. Well, and that is my biggest concern. You said we're in dire, and I really believe that, do you remember the movie Lost in Space, or the show Lost in Space back in the 60s? And it was, warning, Will Rogers. I think we're there. I really do. And I don't want to be a fear monger, but after seeing that debate, we already knew that there was a problem with his cognitive abilities, but that became so blatantly clear. And then the gaslighting that they did afterwards, don't believe what you're seeing, and which is a game they always play. Which brings me to this. I've got a question. Is the physician who they say is signing off on his physicals and is giving him his cognitive test, if he's lying, is he criminally or just ethically responsible? I know that they asked Jean-Pierre, his secretary, spokesperson, directly, does he have dementia or Alzheimer's? And she, blatantly said no. And then, so who is responsible for that? Who can be held responsible for that?
Yeah, that's a hard question, because you have to have an organization that has responsibility for holding the executive accountable. Clearly, we saw from the Supreme Court that culpability for even criminal actions that are done as part of the job, like when Obama, killed an American overseas, that there was a rationale for that, national security rationale.
It was that drone strike, wasn't it? On two people, yeah.
That's right, in Yemen. Those sorts of things, bring up the whole issue that the Supreme Court was trying to deal with, and that is, what is the president, after he serves, accountable for? Is he free to do whatever he wants or not? And so that, I think, to a certain degree, is still being litigated and trying to be discussed, as not only Mr. Trump's cases are being resolved, but others going forward. And I think that was the intent of the Supreme Court, not to give a final answer on a whole assortment of things, but to consider these. Now, you asked about the physician. I know Representative Jackson, who was the doctor that lives in Texas and represents a district there. He's talked about the dementia of Mr. Biden, that, as a former physician to the President of the United States, a couple of them, he had some pretty good insights. So there's no doubt that his attending physicians who do all the necessary medical tests and so forth that a president must go through, they know precisely what they believe to be the fact and the abilities of Mr. Biden, and whether or not, in their professional judgment, they should continue to hold positions of great authority. But your eyes don't, lie to you.
No.
Chris. When we see him stumble and fall, when we see him slur everything, when we see him forget things, this is pretty clear. I think, to my concern, it's not as much him, but it's those that he surrounded himself with that have demonstrated rank weakness. I think of Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, who was AWOL basically because he had a cancer this past turn of the year, and didn't tell anybody, or at least didn't tell the right people, that he was out of action, in spite of the fact that tensions across the world are high. Blinken isn't much better ideologically. He's far left of center. Garland, of course, has done the lawfare issue against Mr. Trump, and he refuses to enforce the law when it addresses a host of things that have brought great trouble to this country. I think of certainly Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, who seems to make excuses for everything. And the list goes on. Like I say, there's 4,000 of these people scattered throughout Washington that are making, very important decisions, and without guidance, quite frankly, likely from Mr. Biden, who is of little use at this point, other than as a figurehead who, as long as he keeps his mouth shut, doesn't get himself in trouble. But if you're only operating 6 hours a day, you don't have too many opportunities to get yourself in trouble, especially when it's orchestrated and choreographed as much as they are. So these are tenuous times.
Well, that makes you wonder who's really in charge.
Joe Biden, probably.
Yeah. Well, you bring that up, and I've heard, is it Tim Hatchett? I guess he's a congressman from Tennessee. Hatcher, you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. I heard him on a show, and just talking about the reasons that a lot of these Republicans will vote with the Democrats, or nobody will do anything, is they're compromised. And you've said before in the past, it's a corrupt, DC is just a corrupt place. And there's a lot of debauchery and other things. And as far as what he said, and I think even Tucker Carlson mentioned, the CIA's got information on these people, and you go our way or we'll expose you. And I don't know if that is as real as they say it is, or if you believe that, that to be fact or true or suspect it.
Well, the first thing that came to mind is, you ask who's running the government, and I kind of, in tongue-in-cheek, said Joe Biden. I think she's running certainly Joe Biden. Now, whether or not she's doing the day-to-day stuff, I understand Hunter's in there going to meetings with his father and making decisions now. So that's troubling. I'm not sure if it's still taking cocaine on a regular basis, or bringing the hookers into the White House, but nothing past him. I recall also that after November of 1916, that when Woodrow Wilson was reelected,
I was going to bring that up.
He got, he basically had a stroke, and his wife took over after he got us into a war he promised he wouldn't get us into, World War I. And then his wife, behind the scenes, ran operations in the White House for the balance of his time there. The argument whether or not it's Barack Obama, which I'm sure has great influence, or a number of others that come to mind, that is clearly not Mr. Biden. There's a lot of government that is operating on autopilot. Much of the Defense Department is doing that. Much of the State Department's doing that. National Security Council, which is of course run by Sullivan, it ought to be interfacing with the president and the intelligence agencies and the Pentagon on a regular basis. I suspect they've assumed much more authority than they ought to. They're just working on guidance, which is fairly typical at that level. But the president, of course, is AWOL in terms of what's going on day to day. I doubt he takes his CIA briefing, which is supposed to happen every day. So he doesn't have a grasp of all the complexities of kind of where the world is today, and therefore he can't be useful in anticipating dangers to us. And so they tend to kind of slide, and our adversaries know that. And so it really makes governing a dicey situation in this very dangerous world we live in today.
Well, I'm glad you brought it. Did I interrupt you? I didn't mean to.
No, that's fine.
I'm glad you brought up the who's the president. His wife was running the country after he had a stroke.
Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson.
Right.
History could be repeating itself again, which I've heard a lot of people say that's what they felt like, and I thought, well, I don't know how smart the woman is, but if she had help, I guess that could be the case. So what is our responsibility as believers? And that's why I like interviewing you, Bob, because you're smart geopolitically. You've got, your 25 years in the military as a leader. You've got, did you teach at the War Room or the War College?
War College, yeah.
War College. So you've got this experience, but you're also a believer in Jesus Christ, and you know your word. You know what your responsibility is as a believer. Are we just to go, well, Romans 13 says we just do whatever they say, and we stay out of it? What is the Christian's responsibility in this?
Yeah, well, a lot depends upon where you've been placed. Yesterday I was in the Pentagon. I was over on the E-ring. The E-ring is where all the power is. I was in the secretary, walking right by the secretary's office, had to go in and talk to one of the staffers up there about an issue that I'm working. As I walk through those hallowed halls, I think about the decisions that people in those halls make that have grave consequences for America.
Yes.
The leaders of all of our wars have been there. They've made decisions that have cost thousands and thousands of lives. Certainly in Iraq, when I was a Fox News analyst and talking to the likes of Mr. Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of Defense, and his deputy, as well as the Chief of Staff and so forth, as we anticipated going into Iraq. I asked hard questions, and I was lied to by them on a host of very critical issues. And, many Americans will recall the weapons of mass destruction argument that Vice President Cheney used and Bush later used, and of course Colin Powell did at the UN. They didn't exist, and I knew it because of my friends that had been kicked out of Iraq that were very senior officers and that had contacts inside. And I tried to push back against these senior people, and yet they persuaded through their various mechanisms to go to war. And as a result, we lost 4,400 precious American lives and tens of thousands of wounded and crippled for the balance of their lives, and destroyed a lot of families. There are consequences for these people. So elections have moral implications going forward. If you put Mr. Biden or someone like him back into office, they'll forget about what they did at the debacle of Afghanistan and the 13 lives lost there in Kabul right before we totally withdrew. They'll forget about the war that never should have happened in Ukraine, but because of the policy decisions by the Biden administration, hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost and the country has been destroyed. And much less what's going on in the Middle East and what will come in the future if Iran and the like get nuclear weapons, which I suspect they will under a Biden regime. These things have grave moral implications. For the church, we're in the business of, looking at the world, praying for the world, but at the same time being representatives of Christ. If Jesus Christ were here today, and he is in spirit, but he's not walking amongst us in a physical way, he would caution us to be, light and to be truth and to stand against darkness and evil. And there's no shortage of darkness and evil all about us. And that's why, wherever you've been planted, like me walking the halls of the Pentagon and going and talking to people, I have a responsibility to be light and to be truth in that setting.
So
Now, that doesn't make it easy.
Right.
And I quite frankly prefer to do other things. But sometimes you do the most difficult because you've been called to that. And so whether you're talking to your neighbor who's squandering his or her life or ruining that of their children or their spouse, or something grave in the community, you need to be that light for Christ. And so we need to be engaged in our communities, in our churches, in our nation. It's more than just voting.
Yes.
Our voice needs to be heard. I often get tired of writing to my senators and congressmen, and because all I get is formatted letters back.
Right.
They need to know, though, I'm not too happy with their very specific shortfalls, the policies they support this president on, and otherwise. If we're not being heard, then the world is going to even cave much faster than it already has been over the last few years. So I think it's time for Christians to rally. I'm not necessarily calling for a political party, but a moral party.
Yes.
Morality must prevail. Morality based upon the Word of God, the Bible. It's pretty clear on all the many issues that are on the front pages of our papers and on the nightly news. We need to be people of the Word. We need to be people of Christ. And that means we need to be, motivated in a way that, causes us to take responsibility for the environment in which we live, even though nobody's asked us to do that except for Christ, because I think it's mandated. Then we need to step out and make our voices heard. We must stay in prayer at the same time and be valiant for the truth. So these are things that come to mind, and I would hope that every Christian would abide and really embrace this view for the good of the country and for the good of the church.
Absolutely. I think I've said it before. We wouldn't have had prayer taken out of school if the church had stood their ground back in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
And they sat on their hands, and a lot of people say that was over the 501c3. They didn't want that taken away, and that to me is almost like idolatry. It was their money that they were worried about. So, Bob, I thank you so much. I always appreciate your wisdom, your experience, and I want to wish you a happy, safe 4th of July, Independence Day. I'm staying home. I'm not going anywhere. So, but anyway.
I am too, Chris. So thank you for the opportunity and bless you for all you do.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day, sir.